Welcome to Disruptive Successor, a show for next generation leaders in family businesses and entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the status quo and take their existing business to a whole new level. We all know that what got us here isn't going to get us there. This show will provide inspiration, advice, and resources to help you create massive impact. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Hi, it's Jonathan Goldhill, and welcome back to another episode of the Disruptive Successor Show. My guest today is Doug Gray. He's a returning guest from a prior show. He's a PhD and is the co-founder at Assess Next Gen and a consultant with the Family Business Consulting Group, where he specializes in leadership development, succession planning, and building family unity and enterprising families. He assists family-owned firms and leadership teams with assessments and strategic solutions that leverage his expertise in positive psychology, outcome-based consulting, executive coaching, conflict resolution, family meeting facilitation, and succession planning. Doug, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Jonathan. Glad to be here.
Yeah, well, great. You know, you were one of my first guests. I think it was maybe episode 6. I don't remember. And here we are, 100 plus episodes, 120 plus episodes later. And some things have changed in your world. You've developed an assessment for rising leaders in family businesses. And tell us a little bit about that instrument.
Yeah, happy to do so. I'm not sure how long ago it was that we spoke last, but it's an example really of responding to clients. So when people say, help, I try to help. For instance, older gens, as you know, are sometimes not able to sleep well at night. Why? Because they're sitting on a responsibility and they don't want to fail. So there's the fear of failure side, but they also don't know how to flourish, which causes a little bit of chaos in their conversations and their thoughts about succession or transference or continuity. Similarly, or at the same time, the next gens, whether they're family or non-family, are struggling with sleeplessness and such, angst at least, because they're well-educated, but they don't know what they can do possibly to show their capacity to step into that role. So not alone, Jonathan, but I reached out with a colleague from the Family Business Consulting Group, who's a neighbor of yours at Pepperdine in Malibu, and that's Kent Rhodes. And one of my colleagues said, you two really ought to hang out together because you're both fairly nerdy and you like assessments. So that's the origin of it.
So that's a really good question, because you like assessments, I like assessments, coaches like assessments. Do clients like assessments? Do business owners like assessments? There's some that seem to take to it and others that seem to feel like it's just off-putting. What's your take on
it? Smart ones do. And I don't mean to be elitist, but I am. We go to our attorney and we go to our lawyer and we go to our physicians for the same stuff, right? We go for more factual data. And to break it down, there's 2 kinds of assessments, quantitative and qualitative. So quantitative are the 1 to 5s or 1 to 10s that others would say about an individual, Doug's propensity to be a good leader in this family organization. The qualitative are those comments. And family businesses generally are not expert or skilled at providing feedback to one another. They, if asked, what should Doug start doing or stop doing or continue doing, really don't know how to express that in a professional way. In contrast to some others in say, a Fortune 500 company who are coached in how to do so. In family businesses, they're fraught with emotions. So if you ask Aunt Sally what she thinks about my son, and Sally would recall that comment 20 years ago, maybe, when I said something or somebody said something disparaging about Aunt Sally, and it gets in the way. What that means is it needs to be a consultant-centric, qualitative coaching process. It needs to go deep, and it needs to be edited before that feedback can be provided to the leaders. So quant and qual, just like two sportscasters at your favorite ball game, whatever sport it is, and the quantitative is delivered directly to the client. Make sense?
It makes sense. And so what I heard you say, though, is that your assessment combines both. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
And it has to. I think it's so important because I think a lot of people, like you just said, and maybe I'm reiterating, they have trouble expressing difficult emotional conversations. And I find, and I'm sure this is what you do in your work, but I find that what I'm doing, whether it's in family businesses or in entrepreneurial businesses, is how to deliver a difficult conversation. And it's even more complex in a family business where the emotions are tied together. And it's oftentimes around things that are hot topics like ownership, control, transfer of wealth, succession topics that some owners don't ever want to talk about. And is that a lot largely what the instrument focuses in on, those types of topics?
Absolutely. Yes, it does. And succession is number one. It's the topic that most present as a presenting issue or the biggest issue. Of course, there are others, but I think of it sometimes as an important way to get at the complexity of a family system in a simpler way. So to be clear, Kent Rhodes and I started with a theoretical model. Think about how does the individual fit in an organization? That's the backbone of all of our work, right? It's the backbone of social psychology. It's the backbone of industrial organizational, IO psychology. And it's the backbone for most of the work we do in consulting, family business advising or consulting. So what does that mean? It doesn't just mean the individual looks at the family system or the business system or the ownership system. Those are the three roles and the three triangles we typically talk about. It also means a fourth one, the learning organization. Virtually all of my clients are of the opinion that they can grow, that they have a growth mindset, we can improve, we can do a better job, and we can create a legacy that supports family harmony, let's say, or durability, or this transfer of assets to create a legacy over time. Well, those are high scores. So Kent and I started with 250 items and then the sample population and whittled it down to 50 items. So there's 10 in each of those 5 domains. That's called a theoretical model. And once you've got that, then you can use it to see if it makes sense for different family systems using 15 or more raters in different rater groups. Make sense?
It does. And so how long does it take to actually complete an assessment? Is there a fee associated with it? And Doug, most people want to know, is this like a real assessment or is this just a lead generation tool for
it's a real assessment.
The family business?
Buddy. Not only is it real, it's, I believe, overdue. We would both say that.
Yeah, I agree.
360 assessments are the most valid form of feedback known to humans. And they exist in traded companies, and they're poorly used in most publicly traded companies. It's not the owner is not the client in this example. It's also not the ownership team or the father or the executive leadership team. The owner of this process needs to be the leader, that next gen leader. So what we do is make sure that that person owns the process, gets the feedback, gets it immediately or as quickly as possible. There's confidentiality is retained in the distribution of these links. Much of this is described at assessnextgen.com. That's the website, and there's some screenshots there. But of course, there's a cost. There has to be a cost. There has to be an investment by individuals in this process, right? So your listeners could become licensees, or they could do it themselves. There's a self-rater that'll soon be available. And if you wanted to build a business practice around using this process, people can do so. It's simple. So the short answer to how long does it take question is the whole process can be done in weeks or under a month. Think of it as a process that invites people to ask about how's this person doing in a conversation that they may never have ever had. In fact, they might have avoided for a decade. One of my clients wanted confirmation that a woman was ready to emerge as the next owner. This provided validation for her father and that hierarchy that frankly resisted that possibility for decades. So it could provide validation, it could provide clarity for you and the client, or for the consultant with the leader. It gives both directionality and rigor. Academic rigor is a thing that academics talk about. So we know these 50 behavioral items. We know what people ought to be doing, but we don't always know how to do it. So in addition to the quant and the qual, there's a bunch of resources that we define that would be useful in those 5 systems.
So they would take this assessment. It's 50 questions. Is that what I understand? It would take half an hour maybe to complete, something
No,
less.
I'd say, how long does it take you to answer 50 questions that are 1 to 5?
Probably. Oh, but they're qualitative answers as well, no?
Right. And those would be separate. So I'd say
Okay.
7 to 10 minutes max per
Okay.
rater. But then remember, there's any number of raters. You could have 15 or 20 or 30
Right.
people providing that feedback. So now what do we have? Now we've got a client who's looking at how to provide professional feedback in a way they've never done so. One of my clients is doing 2 leaders every quarter for the next year and a half. Why? Because he wants to perpetuate this system of providing professional feedback. And he wants everybody to be reminded every 3 months about this process as they provide feedback for others. Make sense?
It does. So it sounds like, though, it could be done outside of it has to be done outside of the family as well. I mean, if there's that many raters, many of the raters are probably not going to be family members. And it sounds like it could be useful in just an entrepreneurial environment without it being family business, as long as there's some kind of succession plan that's being contemplated.
You might be right. I'm not sure. We didn't validate it for those populations. It's not like we could go to only because we didn't want to. Mm-hmm. So we validated it globally with the sample population. It looked at it from a family business perspective. But think of it this way. Let's imagine you have this individual that you want to get more feedback on. Her name's Jo. And Jo initiates this process with an email, and it sends an invitation to, say, 20 different people. And she's going to start with the owners, obviously, the board, if she has a board, managers, peers, direct reports, family and friends, to your point, and then does the self-rater. Why do we need the family and friends? Because they keep Jo going. I had a conversation recently with somebody about this process, and he said when Joe's not working here, Joe steps in on Sunday mornings and he's my preacher. I talk to him every day. He's been my best friend for 20 years. Another friend said, I haven't seen this guy in 10 years. I'm delighted that he reached out and asked me to provide feedback for him. I would work for him anywhere, and I'd run through a wall for him. So in your world, your friends sustain you. In my world, same thing. And I think it's important for people to recognize the power of families and friends in that example. The other thing is non-family members outnumber the family members in all of my clients.
Absolutely.
A 10-to-1 ratio. It's a big ratio.
Right. So you need that feedback. And you're getting feedback from outside of the business, which is really interesting. Exactly. And are they able to answer the people outside of the business? Are they able to answer the questions inside the assessment?
Sometimes they're not, obviously, if it's business related. So they'll click A and not be able to respond to that particular example. But they can certainly answer the qualitatives. What should Joe start doing and stop doing and continue doing? The other piece that's really key is I then send an invitation to all 20 of those raters and invite them to spend 15 minutes with me, and I'll take notes and I'll gather that data. And I I synthesize it like any other social psychologist, the themes and categories, and say, Joe, here's what X number of people have said you need to do. And then on the quantitative, I can share with Joe the fact if he thinks he needs to do this behavior, but his direct reports say otherwise, that's a gap.
Interesting.
Joe, you need to do this one first because the 1.5 out of 5-point scale gap is significant. So boom, let's go, Joe.
Wow. So it's really a tremendous amount of lifting on your part and Kent's part, I assume, taking these questionnaires and getting the feedback and putting the verbal to the qualitative, matching it. Are you looking to automate that at some point or use AI for that, or is that not being contemplated?
AI will never replace these recommendations. It can provide its own recommendations, but there's no threat there. We're clearly focusing on three of the buckets. We assess, we recommend, and we serve our clients. AI will help with the recommendations for some behaviors. If I asked, for instance, how does Joe become a better public speaker? There's some generic answers that may be useful to Joe, but they're not as good as you or me consulting Joe and saying, here's what 20 other people said you ought to do, and here's some narratives to augment this feedback. So, Joe, you ought to do this when you do your next family council or your next family presentation. Or at that next business meeting, you interrupt others or you stutter, that's a problem, Joe, but it's a coachable behavior. So let's go.
So this is really remarkable. You've been working on this for maybe the better part of 2 years. What was the motivator or driver for putting this together?
Gap in the market. I have had clients forever struggle with, how do I improve? How do I show my capacity to my parents? I think, and the other answer is, I've been doing this since 97 at least. I've always been focused on leadership development. There are two other family business assessments we've found. They're descriptive. They're not based around a theoretical model. They have very limited predictive utility, which means you can't really use them directionally for consulting ahead. Given that gap, we did pilot it pretty quickly because we're, I don't know, action-oriented. We're delusional. Right. I'm not sure what the right verbs are. Or
okay, yeah, we'll go for either one.
Okay. And we've had a huge market response in the last few months. It's been delightful.
That's great. How are you getting the word out? I know you've done some podcasts with some colleagues. How are people finding out about this? Are you connected to family business associations, family business schools, colleges? How would people find out about this if they forgot at the end of this podcast and they wanted to look for it? I mean, again, it's assessnextgen.com, but
yep.
How would they know about it?
That's one answer. The other is through referrals. It's how I've grown my business forever. Mm-hmm. I think that the need will be shared by other people. When people are included in this process, then they realize, well, wait a minute, I could be doing this with my other family business, or my spouse could be doing it with her family business. So that's how it will evolve. We've begun to do a little bit of quiet marketing. I've spoken at PPI, and I'll speak at FFI, the Purposeful Planning Institute. I did a webinar last month. The Family Firm Institute, I'll do a webinar this month, and there'll be an article this month. And I've published stuff on familybusiness.org and other locations that might be unique. We're not inclined to make a lot of noise and wave our arms. We're inclined to continue staying focused on our clients and have them provide stories and referrals and share the examples. So
it's fantastic. Now, let's take a moment and let's talk about your street credibility, because you've been with the Family Business Consulting Group, which in my mind is probably arguably the most important family business consulting organization in the United States. How have they embraced this tool? Tell us also a little bit about that company.
Happy to. And you may know that we meet quarterly in Chicago. So it's fresh because we were there last week. I just came back Friday night. Today's Monday. It's a great group. 32 of us, mostly PhDs, and all over North America. 3,000 clients over 30 plus years. Lots of free articles on the website, thefbcg.com. Lots of podcasts and webinars and books. So we're prolific, we're generous, and Kent and I are members. He's been a member for 17 years, and for me, I think 4 years. When we rolled this out, we wanted to get feedback from them, in part because we know and love everybody, and we wanted to see what they could do with their clients. So that has occurred beautifully. One of our colleagues has, she had 5 leaders in Connecticut, and basically gave them a list of possible options to do in their engagement. And they said, we want to start with this thing. What is Assess Next Gen? And I jumped in and it gave them the vocabulary to start their engagement over the next 12 months. It's been profound. Another, one of our colleagues had 3 leaders in Montana or someplace, and longtime owners who had never had any formal schooling in how to mature as owners. And this for them has given them the language to do so. So I think the short answer is in the last few months, others have talked about implementing it, but haven't yet. I have with a number of clients. I'll mention two, maybe more examples. In Virginia, a fast growing company, 40% year over year, has 5 next gens in the mid manager ranks. 2 are family, 3 are non-family. And they're holding on to the rocket ship. They're just going so fast. And the president and the CFO intend to retire at the end of the calendar year. So the owner said, Doug, how quickly can you do this? I said, how quickly do you need it? And he said, about within 6 weeks, before Christmas, before the end of the year. And we did and knocked it out. So for those 5, it gave them direction and specific behaviors that I can continue to work on with them throughout the calendar year. And they're feeling great. They're preparing for that transition. Another example is in Dallas. Founder has 8 executive leaders that he really wants to retain all 8 of them. No history of professional feedback. One of these people is his son, wants to retain him for obvious reasons. And this gave all 8 of them the language that they needed and the process that they needed. I spent 2 days a month with them for 6 or 7 months so that they could implement some of the behaviors that came up. The short answer is, I think there's no limit to who can use this process and how they can use it. I had lunch today with a regional banker from JP Morgan who was quick to say, we can do this with all of our messy clients. When I think about any client in transition, a wealth advisor or an estate attorney could say, hey, who is this Assess Next Gen group? And they could click on and go, and we could serve them. How's that for an enthusiastic response, Jonathan?
I think that's pretty fantastic. I don't expect to hear it in like interstitial commercials between the Yellowstone or the Succession, where the dysfunctional families are really bad, or in past episodes of Marcus Lemonis' The Prophet, where he goes into highly dysfunctional families. But this is an instrument that works well with just 2 generations, father and mother and father, son, daughter. Does it have to have a leadership team of a significant size? So it's a totally scalable assessment.
It can be individual. It's better to have multiple people involved so they
Sure.
don't feel like they've got a target on their back. But
right.
Yes is the short answer.
Fantastic. Well, so great to have you back on the show. I knew when I first saw all those books on your bookshelf that you were a voracious reader, but I didn't know or didn't recall that you were also a PhD and so a voracious producer of material. And this is really important content. And so, all right, last closing thoughts. Maybe you're familiar with the new study that PwC just came out with. You guys probably talked about it at your consortium meeting last week. Give us some insights into the significance of family businesses and maybe why Assess Next Gen is just so important.
I'm not sure which study you're referring to, but this morning I was on a webinar where the 11th PwC study was shared.
That's the one I'm talking about.
Referencing.
Yep.
And one of the things that I love about that is you and I have known for a long time, you as a child, from your personal story, that values drive behavior and family business values are being imitated by publicly owned companies. Well, that trend is continuing. The trend for trust in family businesses is also continuing. Thank goodness. When you and I were children, mental health was a stigmatized thing. It was a negative. But now Gen Zs, according to McKinsey, are saying we expect mental health protocols and services in our family business. We expect it as part of our ESG and our diversity initiatives. Whoa, there's a 180. I think there's no coincidence that in the last 25 years, family business consulting has emerged at the same time that positive psychology research and consulting has emerged. Why? Because I think we're asking the deeper questions. How do we flourish as individuals, as species, as family businesses? How's that?
It's amazing. It's great to talk with such an important and thoughtful thought leader in this space. So I know we need to wrap up. You're on a hard time schedule. Folks, assessnextgen.com. You'll go and you'll grab some screenshots, see what the instrument's all about, and look for some insight into some directional consulting that's going to help you to take your leadership to the next level. So if you're a disruptive successor, highly recommend checking out this instrument. Doug, thanks so much for being on the show.
My pleasure. Go disruption, buddy.
All right. Over and out.
Future. Not for the sake of chaos, for a better future.
Exactly. Folks, you know the drill. If you like this show, give us a good rating on your podcast listening application of choice. Share it with others and stay tuned for future episodes. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Thank you for joining us on the Disruptive Successor podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review, and share with a friend who would benefit from the message. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, Disruptive Successor, go to disruptivesuccessor.com.